Hello, and welcome back to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me is Dr. Phil Mackenzie. And, boy, do we have some fights to discuss with all of you today. We have not one, 2 weekends off ahead of us, which we're very, very excited. But most importantly, what that means is that now, on the eve after UFC 227, we don't have any previews to do. So really, we get to sort of recline, put our feet up, and just have a nice scholarly discussion about the events of this card in Los Angeles, California. That means, of course, the main event, TJ Dillashaw getting his second knockout victory over Cody Garbrandt. Basically the same fight, but easier for TJ this time, is how you could describe it. We're going to talk about the highly controversial decision, which gave Henry Cejudo the Flyweight Championship over Demetrius Johnson in Johnson's 12th consecutive attempt at making a defense of it. We're going to talk about Hinata Moicano beating Cub Swanson. We're going to talk about some other shit from the undercard as well. Overall, Phil, pretty damn good card. A little weird. How'd you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a card that it bummed me out a little in some ways, in which we will get to when we talk about both the main and the co-main event. Mm-hmm. It was a little uneven in terms of the name recognition of, I mean, we didn't really get particularly relevant or highly ranked fights until we got to, I guess, I mean, Moicano Swanson, really.
Yep.
But you know, there was a lot of action and there was a lot of interesting things happening. I mean, the thing is that good cards don't, they're like movies. They don't necessarily need to make you feel happy and excited mm-hmm. in order to be a useful pastime. Sometimes they can just leave you with something to think about. And, you know, it's undeniably a pretty interesting card. And, you know, and I think we got to see the rise of someone. We got to see the rise of someone to, you know, the pinnacle of the sport. Someone, a young, impressive fighter, you know, pretty much come out of nowhere and shock everyone. And I am, of course, referring to Matt Sales.
Matt Sales, by the way, easily the best part of this, the best discovery of this undercard. He looked good.
Did you see his defense, Connor?
His defense was really good. I really enjoyed his defense. It did not materialize into a win. It was not the type of thing I would expect anyone but the nerdiest of fight nerds to actually enjoy when watching a fight. But if you want to see an MMA fighter who knows how to shoulder roll a right hand, watch Matt Sales. Don't expect him to counter off of it, though.
This was, I mean, in all honesty, that was an enjoyable fight, but it was one of the more bizarre episodes of commentary I've seen.
Yeah.
As they just sat there like going, well, you see, if you look at the welts on the back of his ribs, then you'll see that shows that he's actually turning away from the strikes in a very well-trained way. Yeah, maybe be better if he didn't have the welts.
Yeah, that was strange. Joe really, really wanted Matt Sales to be winning that fight. I think it was one of those where the commentators, I think, realized what they were doing. So a couple of minutes in, they had to be like, now, of course, you know, he's Shayna Moraes is still very much in this fight. They kind of tricked themselves.
I always like how John Anik generally keeps his head better than the rest of them do, and often tries to rein them back in just by doing things like quoting stats. So they'll just be talking up one person. They'll be like, yeah, and Fight Metric shows that he is doubling him up on strikes at the moment.
Okay, Phil. So, Dillashaw, Garbrandt, as described, pretty much the same exact dynamics as the first fight. You know, where do you want to begin talking about this one? I feel like that's kind of the entry point for me is, what did Cody Garbrandt do differently this time around? What did TJ Dillashaw do differently, if anything, this time around? Why did it play out so similarly and yet more easily for Dillashaw this time?
So Garbrandt realized that he needed a ranged weapon. And so he came out with a range weapon, and he threw kicks.
Yeah.
And that was his improvement. And Dillashaw realized that...
Underscore that. We're going to underscore that. That was his improvement.
Yeah. Do we want to just go into that? Because I think someone in the BE comments, I believe it was the user Bong Hyun Kim, which is an excellent name.
Classic.
Referenced this as being JDS level improvements. Mm-hmm. So what do we mean by JDS level improvements?
Well, I don't know if this is maybe it must be one of those things that I bring up more often than I realize. But the classic example, I guess, would be Junior Dos Santos, JDS himself, who suffered a completely one-sided defeat to Cain Velasquez in their rematch after knocking him out in 60 seconds the first time around. And then for the rubber match with Cain, he'd been badly out-wrestled and kept having his back put against the fence, and all the things we now know are terrible problems with JDS's game. He came into the rubber match and assured us all, essentially, that he had figured it out. He'd added some new tools now that were going to really surprise Cain Velasquez, and it turned out his adjustment to the impossibly difficult style matchup was to now throw some elbows.
Yeah.
And that's a JDS improvement. We're going to have to come up with a pithier name for this, but thank you, Bong Hyun Kim, for pointing out that this is an archetype I think we should lean into. We should maintain the, quote, JDS improvement as a model going forward, because Cody Garbrandt falls right in. Where, what did he do anything differently other than just throwing kicks for about 2 minutes this time instead of waiting for punch exchanges? That's the only discernible difference. Yeah, that's...
Yeah, the issue is that... So he needed some way of drawing Dillashaw into exchanges. And without just getting... He was just going to get kicked for free if he just hung out on the outside. So It's not a terrible thing to do. It wasn't the idea that... It wasn't necessarily... It wasn't bad. It was an improvement.
Oh, it's certainly not a bad idea.
Would have sat there on the outside and just kicked him all day, as he sort of did in their first fight.
Well, by the exact same logic, the JDS elbows were not a bad improvement either. It makes sense in that it's good to have some weapons to be able to stand your ground in your opponent's area of expertise. That's a great idea. Is to not just be at a loss in certain areas of the fight, but be able to do something everywhere. And so, having some tools at kicking range, good shout.
But the issue is that that Dillashaw is a much more comfortable and better kicker than he is.
Right.
And it's very hard to beat people just at their own game, particularly when you've only really started doing it in the last fight. I mean, he's a decent kicker, but he does not love kicking like TJ Dillashaw does. Let's say that.
No.
And the other issue, obviously, being that Dillashaw had keyed into a large and pronounced weakness in Cody's game, which reared its head very quickly and utterly fatally, as it did the last time round.
Mm-hmm.
And that was his tendency to bite down and swing in the pocket.
Yeah.
And without paying any attention to where his feet are or where his opponent's feet are. And Dillashaw, to his credit, did in fact, you could tell that he was looking for this more, because if Garbrandt was kicking more, Dillashaw was probably kicking less. I felt like he was looking to draw out exchanges from Garbrandt just more than he was in their first fight.
Yeah, well, he said in the post-fight interview that their expectation was that Garbrandt was going to counter the kicks. So essentially, the thing is it's not that Garbrandt made it easier on Dillashaw than he did last time. It's that he made no changes. So essentially, the difference in why this fight was a full round shorter than the last one is kind of that Dillashaw just jumped to the second round of the last fight, where he was like, okay, I'm just going to start leading with naked kicks to start with, instead of hitting upon that idea only after getting knocked down. And I guess he was kind of right. Garbrandt did try to counter those things. The thing is That's what I don't understand with Cody's approach to this fight. He was so insanely intent, it seemed, on getting a first round knockout that like he went for when the end began. You know, there was that one exchange early on where Garbrandt comes in with a nice right hand, overextends, keeps moving forward after he lands it, offering no defense, no threat, and Dillashaw hits him with a really nifty sort of backward reversing shift right hook. So that's the first exchange. And then later, like a minute later, Dillashaw's throwing a front kick or something, and Garbrandt counters with a punch, and Dillashaw falls down. He's just off balance. Nothing appears to land clean. Garbrandt goes nuts trying to take his head off. He gets his back. He starts swinging short hooks. One seems to get in. The other is Dillashaw gets his defense back, and he doesn't seem bothered at all. He seems fine and starts moving backwards to reset. And Garbrandt just comes after him trying to murder him and gets murdered. Yeah. It's like, what are you doing, dude? He just throws big right hands over and over and over. I mean, it was not that this was a typical Cody Garbrandt performance. I mean, in many ways it was, but it was a letdown. Like, I know he is capable of fighting better and smarter than that. He certainly has the technique to he can show better technique than he showed in that finishing sequence, for example.
Yeah, it was honestly kind of shocking because it showed if you put him in this particular position, he will respond to this way and kill himself. Like,
yeah.
I mean, that is because he threw that, as you said, he threw that right hand 3 times and he got countered 3 times.
Yep.
He just threw it, got countered, and you can see he's just stands there in exactly the same position as Dillashaw drifts off to his right, taking more and more of an angle on him as he misses and just hits him repeatedly until he is knocked out. It is one of the most baffling exchanges I have seen in this sport, let alone from one where we've been talking about this as, you know, one of the most technical, interesting fights. You know, I mean, in terms of pure athleticism, striking ability, hand speed, diversity, you know, you don't get much better than this fight. What was that?
Yeah, it's like you describe this, you talk about it like it is, you know, 2 of the best bantamweights in the world, and instead the finish is like Ryan Bader getting knocked out by Glover Teixeira. It's like, whoa, that's the level we're at? We're doing Ryan Bader shit? I mean, I like Ryan Bader, but I didn't sign up for Ryan Bader. I signed up for Cody Garbrandt. Yeah, I will say it's kind of like in a vacuum, a great scientific test of how these two match up, just to show that finishing exchange. They just trade. It's like there's a perfect control. They trade the same shot 3 times, and each time, like you do get a picture of this matchup in that exchange, because the difference between them is like Dillashaw's much smarter in layers. Dillashaw is the fighter who can think in layers beyond the first move. And apparently Garbrandt can't, and that can make Garbrandt, or at least still allow him to look really good when he's counterpunching, when he is being pushed back, and all he has to do is react. But when he's in an exchange, he's going to choose the same punch 3 times in a row, and Dillashaw is going to choose the same punch 3 times in a row, not out of the same instinct, but because it's the same counter opening for every single one of Garbrandt's attacks. And you can see Dillashaw doing, like, he moves his feet a little bit, he gets his head offline more, he just has better position for his counter right hands, because they're counter right hands. Garbrandt is just throwing blind at a target. He's just throwing the same big looping bomb 3 times in a row. Dillashaw is countering it with the same counter 3 times in a row, and you can tell.
Because why wouldn't you?
Of course. He's not changing anything. His chin is still there, so just hit him with the same shit again. And just also, you can see Dillashaw improving on it, where he's like, okay, now we get the clean one. And he gets the perfect, adjusts his feet and gets the perfect distance and angle for the final one that puts Cody down. So Cody, giving the fight to Dillashaw in that moment, but I don't know what was going on in his head, but he was driven insane.
So the question here is, there's a couple of questions here, and that a couple of narratives that have popped up. One is that Garbrandt has no chin, and to be fair, this may be this is clearly true to an extent, right? He's not some iron-jawed Max Holloway, John Jones type.
He clearly has a suboptimal chin.
Yeah, he doesn't have he doesn't have an iron chin,
right.
But we still can't really tell whether he's got a bad chin. And even people with bad chins, this tends to be somewhat subjective over the course of a career. You can have a Sergio Pettis or a Andrei Arlovsky who you can be convinced that they have no chin, and then they can go bizarrely far into a war without getting knocked out.
Right.
I mean, so I think that isn't necessarily true. Also, the other narrative is, did Cody fight too emotionally, and is he now a dramatically different fighter to the one we saw in the Cruz fight? And I'm not sure if that narrative is true either. I don't necessarily think that Cody fought against TJ much different than he did against Dominic Cruz. I think he still had that tendency to just plant his feet and swing.
Sure.
But the issue was that, Cruz is simply completely and just can't capitalize on the same way. I mean, I have this fight running in the background, in fact, while we're talking, and I literally just saw the same kind of sequence happen. Is that they kind of flurry a little. Cruz stands up, gets in the pocket with Garbrandt, and Garbrandt just wings 1-2 hooks at him.
Yep.
And Cruz tries to counter, but Cruz's punching form is not good, and he doesn't punch very hard, and so Garbrandt just gets there much faster and just knocks him down. Cruz is not a counter puncher. There was no, when he gets into these pocket exchanges, he's normally trying to angle out, land a strike, and retreat. Cruz always keeps moving in these exchanges, whereas he always tries to go somewhere.
It was also a remarkably meat-headed performance from Dominic Cruz, whose only solution to the problem in front of him, in the form of Cody Garbrandt, was to double down on the first adjustment he tried to make, and just continue to come forward and press the counterpuncher, which that's why I think you could see a vastly. Cruz just ran into the same layer of reaction over and over and over again. And thought he had to overwhelm it to break Garbrandt, when what he probably should have done is just been more patient and made Garbrandt lead and let some fight time slip away to get this guy's timing. That's the really dangerous thing with a guy like Garbrandt, is just that his hand speed makes him so difficult to time before you've had a chance to see him miss a few times.
Yeah, or just throw from the outside, as he did in the 5th round. Just stay at the absolute limit of your range and just pepper him without putting much on any of your strikes.
He has really short arms. He likes to plant his feet to throw. So just move and poke him from far away, and you'll be fine.
That's basically what he does in the 5th round. It works great.
Yeah.
But
that's the question we were asking coming into this fight.
He needed to create angles on Cody, and so he kept putting himself inside the arc of Cody's flurries. And there's clearly, and when he reached those kind of points of, there's a combination of, there's clearly just a kind of combination of angles and a signal which says we're exchanging now, which just sends that trigger off in Cody's brain that led to him and it totally worked against Dominic Cruz. And so this is concerning for Garbrandt, really, because it's one thing to look at someone and say they made dumb mistakes, they got overconfident. It's another one to say, this guy can't not make this mistake. And it's a bad one. It's one which, you can't do that against Rafael Assunção or Jimmy Rivera or Marlon Moraes or, this division is chock full of big hitters who are going to be watching tape, and they're going to be like, all I need to do is figure out some way of getting this guy into this situation where he just self-destructs.
Yeah, and you don't even have to be that thoughtful if you have the right style. People are now asking for Garbrandt Lineker. I feel like Lineker would wreck Garbrandt, not because Garbrandt couldn't hit him, but because Lineker can take a tremendous shot and Cody can't. He can't take that level of power. And that's really what it comes down to, is that I know that given the way John Lineker fights, Cody Garbrandt would fall into exchanging with him, and that's basically the difference between them comes down to durability. And like this is the question we had about Cody Garbrandt, right? Before this fight was, how good is he really? Because we just saw him as a puncher, really, where he fought a lot of guys who really didn't want to exchange with him, would wait a few minutes in a lot of those fights, and then just come forward and hit them with a bomb and knock them out. And then we saw him against Dominic Cruz, and we're like, okay, he has skills, but he's given this opponent who just keeps trying, for some reason, to run through him again and again and again, keeps trying to set up in the pocket, and keeps getting countered by the same layer over and over again. And now we've seen against Dillashaw, there's still the blindly rushing forward throwing power that clearly has a ceiling, a point at which it stops working that well. And there's the defense that you really have to fight exactly the way Dominic Cruz fought for it to be useful for Garbrandt. You have to just keep leading and feel like you have to overwhelm him with information, and his speed will allow him to adapt to that. But it doesn't seem like there are any layers beyond that for Cody Garbrandt. And yeah, as you said, that's the problem, is that it's not only like we've now seen Cody Garbrandt didn't change. It feels a little like there's a big chance that he may not have the ability to change. That this just might be exactly who he's stuck being. And so, yeah. What do you want to see next for both of these guys? I mean, this was a card with plenty of fight matchup implications. Many people, as I said, have been mentioning Cody Garbrandt's name next to a guy like John Lineker. Personally, as the world's biggest Rafael Assunção fan, that is the fight I want to see. But for humanity's sake, probably good for Cody Garbrandt to take a serious step back, right? That's 2 knockout losses in a row, both identical, except that the second one was cleaner and probably more long-term damage inducing than the first.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to see him fight Rafael. It would be...
It's because I want him to get knocked out, though. I mean, I really want Rafael to knock him out, so...
You're a cold man.
It would be a great style matchup, though, wouldn't it? It'd be really intriguing to see.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, is that can... the question would be... Because Garbrandt does plant his feet in flurry, but only when he is in exchange situations,
right?
And only when he feels like the guy has stopped his feet in front of him.
Yeah.
So the question for Assunção is, can he bring that out of Garbrandt? Because if he tries to play a range fencing game with and he tries to just look for a counter right hand against Garbrandt, there's a significant chance he's just not fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
He just wouldn't be able to bait Garbrandt into the kind of exchanges which cause Garbrandt to get done. I think he would have to fight at a slightly higher pace and take slightly more risks than he is accustomed to doing. Totally winnable fight for him, but still, it would be an interesting one.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. I mean, it's also like on the it satisfies both of my desires, because people aren't going to give. There was a poll on Twitter I just saw. It was like, who should be next for TJ Dillashaw? And of the 4 options listed, of course, Rafael Assunção is dead last. Even though he has a better case on paper than anybody else in this division, it just doesn't. People don't care, and they never have. And he's not a super exciting fighter all the time, so I get it. But on the one hand, I know he could win that matchup because he is, on a good night, like possibly the best bantamweight in the world. Rafael Assunção is just one of those fighters who's super well-rounded and can do everything exceptionally well. But also, I know that it would be better than feeding Cody to John Lineker now after 2 knockout losses. So I want to see that. What about for TJ, right? They were on the night trying to hype up this, and we'll get to Cejudo soon enough, but they were trying to hype up this quote-unquote super fight with Henry Cejudo that was suggested. I don't want to see that. And
nope.
Fortunately, it sounds like that Dillashaw included, everyone's now backing off that idea, but I don't. Bantamweight is literally probably has the healthiest conveyor belt of contenders in any division in the UFC right now, with like 3 or 4 viable challengers for the championship for the champion right now. And it's not the division to hold up with a super fight that literally no one asked for. I mean, what's even enticing about Cejudo Dillashaw other than the fact that they're both champs? Who gives a shit? So I want to see Dillashaw fight Moraes or Assunção. I think that's the way to go.
Yep, I think we probably get Moraes. Obviously, they
might go with Cruz.
They would like to do Cruz, but I don't expect much from Cruz at this stage in his career, I have to say, against the current crop of challengers.
Yeah.
I mean, in the fight against Garbrandt, we've mentioned this kind of dynamic before. It felt like that 5th round was one of the classic pulling permanent reserves out rounds where, an aging fighter kind of manages to bring something out of themselves that they can never really do again. He did look slower. It was also that, it was an unforgiving style matchup, which he didn't recognize as such at the time.
Right.
And
none of us did, to be fair. None of us knew that Cody Garbrandt was a good counterpuncher.
Yeah. But, after a lot more injuries, I don't think we get the same Cruz back in the octagon again.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't hate it. I have wanted to see a rematch of that fight because the first one was one of those really intellectually satisfying sort of back and forth wars. So, but
yeah, I also feel like TJ kind of figured him out at the end.
Yeah, right. I mean, he's gonna do what he just did to Cody. He's just gonna start doing the thing that worked earlier in the rematch. So he's just gonna start kicking Dominic's legs very early. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, Cruz Moraes, Cruz Assunção. Dillashaw versus both of those guys sound like good options. Bantamweight fucking rules, man. It is just the best division right now because it feels as stacked as lightweight. And yet, relative to the size of the fighters, it's like the most violent division in the entire sport. It's just a bunch of punchers and sluggers and knockout artists who match up really intriguingly with one another. So, great bantamweight showcase. TJ Dillashaw, looking electrifying as usual. Cody Garbrandt, this may be one of the most definitive. I mean, it depends. We'll see how things shake out and how he can adapt. But this could go down as one of the more definitive, like, exposing moments in a fighter's career that we've seen for a long time. Where Garbrandt was like, this could be, now everyone knows how to fight this guy. He can only do these couple of things, and it doesn't seem so scary now that we've seen it undone twice in impressive fashion. So, we'll see what lies ahead for Cody Garbrandt. But let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Flyweight title fight. I know you're all waiting for this one. Maybe the only narrative involving Demetrius Johnson that many fight fans will have ever cared about. But the champ was fucking robbed, and we're going to talk about it after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. The Flyweight title changed hands Saturday night. Demetrius Johnson went in there against Henry Cejudo, rematching the man he beat in just over a minute last time around for his 12th consecutive title defense, and lost. And, finally, right, Phil? We've been waiting for it. The Demetrius Johnson era has finally come to an end, and with good reason, because Henry Cejudo very clearly did better than most expected. Oh, wait, no, won. Very clearly won the fight. And
those two things are the same, Connor, and Damn you for trying to imply that they're not.
That does seem to be the case lately, doesn't it? Well, let's talk about... I mean, I feel like we should just start off here talking about the decision. That's the big story with this matchup. And in analyzing how it played out, like, to my eyes, this is a very clear-cut fight. The two phases in which it was largely contested were not super competitive. There were periods where Henry Cejudo had control and nothing was happening from Demetrious Johnson, and so you can say, oh, that minute was Henry Cejudo's. And then there were many minutes where Demetrious Johnson was landing clean strikes, and Henry Cejudo, seriously, for the most part, was not landing clean strikes. So, like, to me, it's not like this is a difficult fight to watch where you're like, oh, watch it without the commentary, and maybe they'll... Or, you know, like, watch this exchange again. You'll see Henry gets in this clever shot here, or it's pretty clear-cut. So how did you judge this one, Phil? And how enraged are you with the way that the judges judged it?
I'm not sure exactly what my scores were, because there were a couple of rounds in there that were close. But I would probably say 49-46 for Demetrious Johnson. I think that... And I would honestly say I think that 50-45 for DJ is probably a more defensible score than Cejudo winning.
Yes, I would agree. Much like Jose Aldo over Frankie Edgar, where I have long said, not being the only one, but I've long said, that fight was closer to 50-45 Aldo than it was to 48-47 Edgar. This fight was the same way. I don't see how you could give Henry Cejudo 3 rounds. I really, truly don't. I think you can just look at the first 3 rounds and then know that the last 2 are not 10-8s for anyone and know who won this fight. The first 3 rounds are all Demetrious Johnson, and I can't tell you how shocked I was watching live when the 3rd round rolled around, and Joe Rogan quite confidently said the 2nd round was probably Henry Cejudo's. I mean, it looked like it was his, I think is what he said. And how can that be? How can that be? I mean, let's pull up the statistics here, Phil, on Fight Metric. Don't you love looking at statistics after a fight?
Sometimes.
I never do, because the only reason I'm ever compelled to do so is because I have to friggin' use the numbers for an argument. So 30 strikes in general, but in the 2nd round, we have 15 strikes from Demetrious Johnson, 11 from Henry Cejudo, not 11 particularly good shots, and 15 strikes from Demetrious Johnson, many of which were leg kicks that were having a clear effect, causing obvious pain to Henry Cejudo, causing him to stumble or lose his balance. I think the 2nd round may have also been the round in which Demetrious Johnson landed a vicious knee to the body, followed by a couple of short left hooks, one of which cut Henry Cejudo. And then he got taken down with about a minute left, got up after about 35 seconds, and then nothing else happened. And that was a Henry Cejudo round. So, I don't know. Do we just score fights differently than everyone else, or was this really a case purely of people expected Cejudo to get fucked up exactly as badly this time, and he's doing better?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this was a combination of a great many. This was a weird combination of a lot of judging tropes and bad judging tropes. So it was the inability to score leg and body attacks, hometown bias, because they were in California and the crowd was clearly for Cejudo, and also, you know, he was the underdog. I mean, there's a point in like the 5th round, I think, when DJ just cleanly head kicks him and then tries to angle out and slips, and the crowd goes nuts. Like, Cejudo just, you know, knocked him down.
They were screaming wildly for a flurry in which Cejudo didn't seem to land a single clean punch. They're swinging at each other, and Demetrious is just moving, and neither man is landing, but they're both like Cejudo's really putting effort into landing power. And the commentators too talk about these exchanges as if Cejudo is being extremely effective.
Yeah. So also Cejudo no selling strikes and just marching forward a lot. He's just being incredible. I mean, this is one of the things, is that their first fight was pretty shocking to me, because there's one thing that we've seen from Cejudo's MMA career is that he is ridiculously durable.
Yeah. A lot of his previous fights were
was very weird.
Yeah.
I mean, it was clearly just a pinpoint, found the single shot that finishes the fight type deal. So so Cejudo was able to kind of do the whole Lineker thing of marching forward and looking like nothing was really getting through to him, despite the fact that these were all, objectively cleaner, harder shots.
Yeah.
That were actually like landing full on, whereas the majority of the stuff that Cejudo was landing in return was, it was generally just bouncing off arms. It was at very tip extension. I mean, it's really hard to look back at those first 3 rounds and really see a meaningful strike that Cejudo actually lands.
No, that is 100% true. It is. There's a ton of exchanges where the commentators both talk about how, this shot landed, and if you just watch it, like, if you're a judge, I understand you're watching there live, you have different angles and everything, and so some of that shit's going to confuse you, but if you have the optimal position to view a strike, you should not have to rewatch it or anything to be able to say that was not a clean strike. That one didn't land cleanly, that one did, and to be able to judge between strikes. Every time we get a decision like this, Phil, somebody, at least one person online, will be baffled at the idea that judges are supposed to determine the subjective quality of each strike. They'll be like, well, what? So, like, you're not just supposed to count them? You're supposed to be able to say this shot was harder and better than that one? How can you? Yes, that's the job, is being able to tell when a good punch lands versus a not so good punch, or when a punch is evaded. And I have never been a particularly big fan of Demetrius Johnson's range striking. It's a lot of like tricks and not very systematic, but he is extremely quick and he has a lot of experience. He knows what patterns generally appear in striking exchanges, and he's quick enough to, without having a systematic defense, still respond to those things. In the vast majority of the exchanges in the first 2 rounds of this fight, when Henry Cejudo threw a shot, Demetrius Johnson got his hands in front of it and didn't get hit. And so I don't know how you can give those rounds to Henry Cejudo. I'm sorry, but in the scoring criteria, you cannot steal a round with a takedown. All right? Not if you didn't win any portion of the round up to that point. It's not how it works. Grappling and wrestling are given more precedence if they occupy most of the round. If most of the action of the round is comprised of striking gets precedence in the scoring, and vice versa. You cannot steal a round of striking that you lost with a takedown that leads to nothing. It is literally against the scoring criteria to do that. So I think it was not a blowout performance from Demetrius Johnson. Every round was like within, except for the first, was like within 6-7 strikes. At least according to Fight Metric. But I think, like, if you're a judge, you should be able to read the quality of those strikes, and this is not the kind of fight where you should turn in, like, you can't find 3 rounds for Cejudo in this fight. I'm sorry. I'm happy to call this one a bad decision. And
so you mentioned, you know, it wasn't a blowout, and that's obviously, you know, that was obviously affecting things as well, and that's one of the big narratives that we've seen. I mean, because I was looking back at the Borg fight before this, and the thing is that we forget just what the mighty Whizbar makes you forget what a shit kicking that fight was before then. He was up like 60-something strikes to 1 at some point. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and the Wilson Hayes fight, too, like, he just ran circles around Wilson Hayes. He beat him every bit as impressively as Cejudo did.
Yeah.
Just dismantled him with ease. So, yeah, you do get used to seeing Demetrius Johnson against a certain level of opponent or against a certain kind of matchup and expect him on some level to deliver that kind of performance. And that's clearly not what happened here. But does that mean that Cejudo is being remarkably effective? You can't just not lose as badly and get the cards for that.
So I tell one of the things this reminds me of is Jones Gustafsson. Is when I first saw that fight, I actually had it spoiled for me before I saw the fight. And I was a big Gustafsson fan. And so it was like, Jones defends in, controversial war against. I was like, wow, he really pushed into the edge, right? And I watched the fight, and I was just sitting there thinking, I'm not really sure how Gustafsson's winning this.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he was doing, and I think, in retrospect, again, it's one of these fights where I feel like there's more of maybe not 50-45, there's certainly more of an argument for 49-46 Jones, which I think is my actual score, than there is for Gustafsson actually winning it. He clearly, but, a lot of people were incredibly mad. They felt like he got robbed. And I feel like at the moment we're kind of we're in the reality of like, what if rounds like that just go the other way? What if fights like that, where someone suddenly, the shocking challenger bias, makes people think that people win when they didn't?
There's got to be a change to scoring or something if that's going to be the case, though, because there's not enough rounds here to fuck around with in MMA. This isn't a boxing championship fight where you can afford 3 swing rounds on your scorecard and still have a comfortable decision if you've done your job really well as a fighter.
Yep. I mean, and the thing is that this was also a great throwback to old terrible judging, because MMA judging has admittedly, gotten far better.
Yeah, people were saying
not prioritizing meaningless top control over actual strikes.
People were saying
this was old school trash judging.
Absolutely, that people have been saying online, like, you can always win a round with a takedown. You could steal a round with a takedown. Everybody knows that. I'm like,
no, you can't.
Have you been shutting your eyes as we moved away from that for the last 2 years? I thought we made progress. But it just feels like a lot of underdog bias. People expected Cejudo to get wiped out. I came into this fight thinking that was a silly expectation, because just based on skills and physicality, I mean, you saw when they tied up and wrestled, it was all Henry Cejudo could do to just cling to Demetrius Johnson and hold him down, because the moment he allowed space, there tended to be a scramble and Demetrius would get out. But you could see all the things that were supposed to have made the first fight close and interesting were true. I would never have.
I mean, this is like Mendes Aldo, right?
Yeah.
You come in, the guy gets wiped out in the first fight, goes away, makes tons of clear, visible improvements. You come back, you can't expect him to get wiped out in the second one. He is an elite, top-end athlete with, skills in multiple areas. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and a very different kind of fight, but just like Mendes Aldo too. I don't think there should be any questions about whether or not those improvements were enough.
Yeah. So let's talk about what Cejudo did, though, because I think it was a good performance from him.
Yes, I agree.
Because one of the things is that DJ is someone who, he is someone who works best when all the pieces of his game are allowed to function.
Yeah.
And that was clearly not the case, in that he couldn't wrestle or clinch with Cejudo, so he was stuck in just a striking match.
Yeah, Cejudo managed to make DJ look like more of a rote fighter than most opponents are able to. I don't know if you got that impression as well, but yep. I felt like I could really see the gears turning in Demetrius Johnson's head in this matchup more than I can in most. It did look that, again, why people I think overrated Cejudo's success. He was genuinely making Demetrius Johnson think and reconsider and adjust. You could see Demetrius Johnson would do 2 moves and a feint and then a left hook, and a good portion of the time, the target just wouldn't be there. It wasn't Demetrius Johnson's speed is fast to him as well, is what we discovered. You know what I mean? It's not like he's in The Flash, where everything seems like slow motion when he's moving quickly. He actually cannot see openings as quickly as he moves. And so when he's going through these sort of preset combos or going in with a preset idea for what he's going to end up attacking, Cejudo was able to get away from a lot of that. And certainly, I think if you are sort of a rote flowchart fighter, and you just happen to have a bigger flowchart than anyone else, then not having access to your full range of options is a big problem. And it was very clear Demetrius Johnson could not dominate with striking in the clinch like he did last time, and really couldn't afford to spend a ton of the time in the clinch at all with Demetrius Johnson, and certainly was not on his level in terms of takedown defense. So, like, Demetrius Johnson had a limited palette to work with here, and it did make him look, I guess a little less like there was a clear through line in his tactics. Like, it was a little less clear what exactly he was working towards.
Yeah, so there were clearly I think it's the idea that DJ is the last remaining idea of the last remaining exemplar of the commentary trend that speed is footwork.
Absolutely.
I mean, because I think before the Cejudo fight is that before Cejudo Pettis, I said I think that Pettis might give Cejudo problems because I think he might have the best footwork in this division, and which people would say, of course, it's Demetrius Johnson, but Sergio Pettis does have better footwork than Demetrius Johnson.
Yes, he does. Absolutely.
He will, and part of the reason why is because he's not just blitzing in and out on sort of unseeable lines, and so Cejudo was able to scare DJ off a lot of exchanges simply by aiming. I mean, Cejudo is neither of these fighters are incredible defensively. Neither of them, they're not Matt Sales, but Cejudo was able to just, he was a lot of it was relying on just speed and toughness. Is that he would either, when DJ came in, he would either just zip backwards slightly, or he would just stand his ground and kind of swing.
Yeah. And
a lot of the time, it seemed like his actual effectiveness came mostly from like head clashes rather than him actually landing strikes on the way in. But which is one example.
He was an
advantage of being like 30% head.
But he certainly was not able to read the position of Demetrius Johnson's targets any more than, you know what I mean? Like I'm saying it made DJ look more rote than usual, but Cejudo didn't exactly look like a sharpshooter either. He was having a very hard time telling where the chin was going to be or the target was going to be in those clashes. Just kind of swinging blind.
Yeah. So there was but what he could aim for is clinch exchanges.
Yeah.
And I think Cejudo's clinch has become genuinely amazing, like very, very impressive. And if he gets a chance to use it against someone who's not, one of the, if not the best clinch fighters in MMA, I mean, Cejudo might be the best clinch fighter in MMA now. We don't really know, but he did, because it's not the fact that he's now no longer just doing one thing. He used to just basically lock up with people and just kind of throw hockey punches, but now we're seeing, all these like little interstitial knees. He's got amazing second drive on his takedowns. He'll just, he will do 3 or 4 things very, very quickly. Whereas before you could almost hear the screeching of metal when Cejudo was going through phases. But at least in the clinch, he's become, really fluid and genuinely scary.
That one transition from the over under landing the body knee and then to the inside trip was really, really nice. Like again, a good showing from Cejudo. And I think too, like one of the things he was really effective with was maybe just the overall way he approached exchanges was he did not allow Demetrius Johnson to pressure much. And I think like DJ would have been better served to take some more chances and to try to force the pressure more. But, he thought, as you and I both did, that he was comfortably winning. And so there was no need probably to really go out there and face that risk. But Cejudo did a good job of standing his ground, pressuring without really having to work that hard or do that much, and stealing rounds with takedowns.
The thing is, I'm not. I might take a different read on that one because I think that perhaps, and I think that's maybe because like when it comes down to it, just the way like you and for example Patsy fights, you're much more likely to favor pressure, whereas I'm more of a fan of running away.
I like running away too, Phil.
I know you're a Machida fan. You're not as much of a born in the a kind of dyed in the wool
not
Pressure
quite as
fan as Pat is.
Quite as much of a fucking rube as Pat. You know, I don't always have a piece of straw hanging out of my mouth like Pat does. I don't hold a glass of water with both hands to drink like Pat does.
Yeah, we do need to talk more shit on Pat in this show.
I mean, yeah, it's.
So dumb guys might think that, DJ just needs to up the pressure, but in some ways I feel like DJ and Cruz share a similar mentality, is that they will, and it does work a lot for them in a lot of their fights, because it is good. It is process.
Mm-hmm.
They will just
Don't
they will
say
attack and they will
process
build
on the
and they will
show.
break down and they will always try to be winning.
Yeah.
But there is an argument in some fights for just winning ugly, close decisions without taking any risks. And that was sort of what, got Cruz into those issues against Garbrandt, is that he was just like, I need to be, in every exchange, I should be winning. I need to pile up more volume on this guy. And so he kept pushing himself back into so he was like, I need to figure out more, what is the right offensive angle to take on this guy? Not like, I should just fight this guy from outside these, in the pocket angles that I keep trying to go for. I should just try and fight him from out there. So in some ways, I felt like DJ, he could have just, a lot of his actual issues in the most of the fight, it was just clinch exchanges off kicks.
Mm-hmm.
That Cejudo was able to kind of just rush in and kind of bowl him over in clinch exchanges. In some ways, he could have just boxed and gotten up on the cards and then just not gone into any clinch exchanges and counters.
It would have taken a Demetrius. Like, the reason I would have liked to see pressure is because I think that's what Demetrius Johnson does best. I think he's most comfortable pressuring and like forcing reactions, so that it puts him into this dynamic where it's all about who can adapt more and faster, who has more layers and can access them more quickly. And I think it would have encouraged more flow out of him, which was the real problem, was just grabbing momentum and holding on to it. He had control of the fight, again, for the first 3 rounds without too much difficulty, but couldn't really run away or ramp it up in any way. I think too, like what you said earlier about Cejudo, just as a style matchup, as an opponent, throwing a wrench into a very pivotal part of Demetrius Johnson's fighting mechanism, that he couldn't go to the clinch. He felt he couldn't go there. He couldn't shoot, couldn't tie up and go to a knee or whatever. And without that, how much like layered boxing have we ever seen out of Demetrius Johnson? He's not. Striking may be his worst skill set, technically speaking. It may be his most imperfect skill set. And I just don't think he was, given the way the fight was playing out, the directionality of it, the pace and everything, he didn't seem like seemed like he felt he had more answers. He didn't run out of ideas. Once something works for Demetrius Johnson, he's going to keep working it, and hence the leg kicks that he was having great success with. But he couldn't really build. And I thought if he wasn't going to be able to do that just with striking techniques alone, he would have needed to pressure to feel comfortable getting more shots out there and actually creating some openings, getting past that first exchange,
I don't know. I mean, this is the thing, is that how good is Henry Cejudo at leading? Is my question.
Clearly not very good.
Yeah, because so could DJ win a boring counter-striking performance against him?
Well, the thing is like
I suspect he probably could.
I'm trying to improve on what I already think is a winning performance from him is the problem.
Yeah,
because I already think he did do kind of what you're suggesting. Like, he didn't feel the need to pressure too much. He won a slow striking battle and tried to avoid getting taken down, and did it well enough to earn the scorecards, and they just didn't go his way. So it's kind of hard to critique the performance. Like, you can say where he ran into difficulties that made it look less impressive than a typical Demetrius Johnson performance, but really, like, That's a pretty high standard. That's a pretty hard curve to grade even Demetrius Johnson himself against, because he has done some insanely impressive shit over the course of his career. So, bullshit fucking decision. I mentioned all of the things I'd like to see happen at bantamweight. Do not make Cejudo Dillashaw, okay? UFC, if you do that, you're an idiot. You're dumb. You're a big, stupid, dumb guy.
That people said, oh, look at it, he's going for the fight that Demetrius Johnson wouldn't. Yay! But let's also remember every person who wins a belt does this pretty much.
Yeah.
They always come out and say, not every, like a solid 50%. They'll just. But
I think that,
like, didn't Dillashaw call out Aldo like back when he won the belt the first time?
Probably.
Like, they always do this, and then like the adrenaline wears off, and they realize, yeah, actually, I like having this belt.
I like money.
Yeah,
it's but the thing is the UFC has been so dumb lately with their absolute hound-like eagerness to jump at every single super fight opportunity that materializes. They don't give a shit how it will affect the divisions. They are just absolutely, and bantamweight is the last division that needs that to happen. And likewise, what the hell else is going on at flyweight right now? Is there a better division in the UFC for an immediate title rematch? I would contend that no, there is not. Give Demetrius Johnson his immediate rematch is what I'm saying, and don't make us watch.
I disagree.
Oh, Phil, why?
Make Demetrius Johnson fight again against.
But that's
either Benavidez or Pettis, I guess.
Okay, you want him to have a comeback fight?
Yeah, I want him to have a comeback fight.
I think that's fine too. That would work for me.
Because it will make people mad, and that's what sports is about. It's not about enjoying things. it's about making people cross about stuff. And Demetrius Johnson has never really made people cross, apart from people who don't think he's good or whatever, or get angry because he's short, but not in a way that makes people invested in seeing his fights. Yeah. But if you're like, if you do something where you go, Cody Garbrandt, who never defended his belt, got an immediate rematch, but 11-time champion Demetrius Johnson, you have to go back and fight Sergio Pettis now.
It would be. The thing is,
it would be good because people might actually get pissed off by that, and there would be articles about it saying how it was bullshit, and that's what sport's about. Making people mad.
Making people cross.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think I would be okay with that, only from the perspective that like this is my like post Donald Trump getting elected, rationalizing, trying to make myself feel better about what happens, where immediately after this decision I was like, well, I don't know, I guess it could be a good thing, right? For Demetrius Johnson, because no one cares. And now they might care. Because like people are talking about this robbery, people are talking about defending it as well. You know, like there's a big contingent on both sides, and like there's genuinely a narrative around a Demetrius Johnson fight now, and so like you could actually let that marinate a little bit, and build up to a rematch, like a rubber match that really feels like it means something. And it's been a long time since Demetrius Johnson has had a fight that really feels like it means something. So maybe
I feel like the UFC in a lot of ways doesn't recognize the value of deferring things, particularly, at in a division where there's only one thing you can do.
Yeah. And
everyone doesn't care about it. Why not just go, well, you can't have it yet. And then maybe that would work. And admittedly, this is kind of bullshit. This is kind of bullshit for DJ. I fully admit this strategy is a little unfair on him. But I think it would actually get people more interested in this, to have him as like the rightfully dethroned, the dethroned, but the unfairly dethroned king, fucking people up in the division, whilst Cejudo just lords it over everyone. And yeah, I think it makes sense.
Could also be a time for like a bullshit super fight for DJ. That now that he no longer has a title obligation, it's like, let's let him fight a bantamweight or something. Give him some matchup that he can win impressively, So it's like, oh, he's back on the warpath. And that would feel like possibly a fitting fight to have if, for example, Cejudo isn't ready to fight right away again. Or, I don't know. I mean, give him the fucking rematch.
He can land 3 identical counter right hands to knock out Cody Garbrandt.
Cody Garbrandt. That would be amazing. Yes, make Demetrius Johnson Cody Garbrandt. I need to see that happen. But, yeah, the UFC, I don't know what they'll do, but deferring things, like letting things marinate and build. Dana White goes to like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, orders his steak in a dog bowl, and eats it all in like 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. It's just that type of. And then like when the person he's dining with looks away from their bowl, he eats theirs too, and he gets sick. He throws up on the carpet, and then he eats that because he just cannot look into the future far enough to imagine that the leftovers might be enjoyable too. Anyway, okay, enough of that. Let's move on. There's still more from this card to talk about. We've got Renato Moicano over Cub Swanson. We wanted to look at Pedro Munoz, who had perform in an insane fight with Brett Johns, and I want to talk about maybe what the dark future of Brett Johns may be after that too. And then Alex Perez, the new terrifying monster at Flyweight, maybe he'll be the next guy to fight Henry Cejudo if Demetrius Johnson never gets the chance again. Who knows? But we'll find out after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Hello, welcome back to Heavy Hands, Segment 3, Renato Moicano, Cub Swanson. Phil, did this go how you expected it to go?
It did not.
No. How did you expect it to play out?
I expected it to be a kind of technical war of attrition where Renato Moicano's focus on fundamentals over weird stuff kind of pulled him ahead and steadily broke down Swanson a bit. And I guess it sort of was that, but in hyper fast forward. Mm-hmm. It was a bit like Dillashaw Garbrandt if, but their second fight, whereas I was expecting something close to the first. So the fundamental dynamics weren't different, but just the bizarre speed with which it played out made me a little worried for Cub, frankly.
You think so?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Barboza got knocked down by a jab that one time. He's been okay. It was a mean jab, Phil. It was a very mean jab that he knocked Cub down with. It was a mean
jab, but he didn't. But Barboza was hugely out of position and had his eyes closed. It was like mid-swing.
Yeah.
This one, Swanson was just standing there.
Yeah.
I tried watching it a bunch of times to see like where are his feet. It wasn't super it wasn't a super bad position. It just really hurt him.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say he lost track of the range.
Like, yeah, he looked like he didn't see it, which is also
right
worrying. I mean, he didn't look braced at all in any way.
Moicano just takes this little angled step, so he gets this nice line down the center, and Cub is like, I guess he just doesn't realize how long Moicano's arms are. He's just standing, he's just waiting for it to hit him. Yeah, I guess I didn't think about it from that perspective, but I guess you could. I'm not ready to read into it just yet, but maybe that's a bad sign.
The Cub has always been a tremendously durable guy.
True.
Although flying knee notwithstanding, when has he really been stopped when has he been stopped by strikes?
Yeah, true. It's very true. I mean, he didn't get stopped here either, but he also, he got dropped by a jab.
Yeah.
So.
And also, if they had stopped it, I would have been fine. When he was getting beaten up on the ground.
Oh yeah.
So what else did you see about the fight?
Moicano's really good, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
He's a very good fighter. He's still 26 years old, 25. He's still quite young. He's just like I don't know. 29, whatever. Young enough. He's older than me, okay? So that means I'm quite young by definition now. Yeah, he's like he's part of what feels like a new vanguard in MMA, like of just very serious. Like this is no longer we're no longer waiting for Rory McDonald's to appear as our new like up and comers, where they just do everything. And like Moicano has a very well-rounded game, but he's extremely focused on like his particular way of fighting. And I watch him and he just reads well schooled to me. And it feels like he's one of quite a few younger fighters now who come up and you're just like, wow, like who is training this person? His game just works really, really well. Like he came to the UFC with a mature understanding of how he matched up with other styles. And had a full understanding of how like his game just doesn't have any like guesswork in it. And that's what I like. That's what really came through in this matchup. Cub had some good moments. He, much like in the Ortega fight, especially like when he was being pushed back, he was landing some good counters. His left hand was working. But like Moicano just has this razor focus where he stays in his stance almost all the time. He keeps his eyes on his opponent almost all the time. He's very difficult to distract or scare, and his response to being attacked because he has such confidence in his positioning. Like he knows he's stable, he's balanced, he has a very good sense of range, obviously. He's not afraid at all to just swing heat back at Cub. There were moments in this matchup where both guys were swinging wildly, but something that stuck out to me was how much more aware of what was happening Moicano was than Swanson in those exchanges. Moicano is just sort of like not standing too tall, but just kind of head above the fray, watching these wide swings come at him and miss, and watching his own wide swings go back. Like furious, wanting to exchange, wanting to hit Cub hard, and jaw clenched, prepared to take a hard shot in return, but not guessing. Very, very focused on what was happening in front of him. And that's what makes him scary, I think, because I don't know, like, you see him go into that Jeremy Stevens fight and fight this perfect disciplined fight as a really relatively inexperienced fighter, and then he comes up with the perfect adaptation and destroys Calvin Kattar in what was expected to be a more competitive matchup. And then he comes in here against Cub Swanson, and it's like he gives you a sense of imperturbability, and it all stems from like a fundamentally sound game. So, I don't know. I'm a little scared of Renato Moicano at this point, Phil. I think he could stick around in this division for quite a while, giving people problems.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is that this division gives you such a good view of the idea of there being levels to this. Because you can look at someone like Shane Burgos, and you can just be that guy is incredibly impressive. He already understands things like rhythm and how to draw out shots and how to mix things up to the body. And he looks like an incredibly impressive another one of these young, incredibly impressive, well-trained strikers. And then he comes out and he just gets out-game planned, out-fought, and out-thought by Calvin Kattar.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, wow, that was incredibly impressive. This guy is clearly smart, understands fighting at several levels, and Kattar was just levels above him. And then Kattar goes out and gets pretty much dominated by Renato Moicano. Mm-hmm. And this is the stuff that you just do not see this happen at light heavyweight, the bigger weight classes, or even middleweight. You just don't see it. You don't see this kind of idea of this person is actually pretty technically impressive and subtle, but this person is a level above them, and this person is a level above that, and these guys aren't even the champions.
No, the big guys have the worst kind of parity.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, everyone sucks equally.
Yeah. And so this was just amazingly impressive from Moicano. And it's like you said, it was that idea of not guessing, because Cub threw a great many different things at Moicano over the course of this fight, and it wasn't very long. You know, what was was the first strike he threw something like a big wide right to the body, right? Something like that. He threw wide right to the body. He threw like his switching body kick, a big low left, big right. You know, he just threw a ton of weird stuff, and it is classic Jackson Wink striking of just going to throw a ton of things, and maybe one of them will work, and then from that point on, we'll build from whichever one of the 6 tools I've thrown at this guy, and we'll build on it, and then eventually we'll establish something over the course of the fight, which organically, and Moicano was just like, I'm just going to jab him, just going to lower my base, I'm going to step to the side, I'm just going to jab. That's pretty much what I'm going to do.
There was no guesswork.
That's my range weapon. Yeah, he was just like, I don't need all these things. All I need is slightly different timings and angles on my jab.
Yeah. It is a veteran's way of thinking, because we talk about prospects running out of ideas. It's not because the experienced guys really have more ideas or like more options than them, you know? It's not like they have strikes that the younger guys haven't advanced to the right level to be able to throw yet or something. It's that they understand it's all about the nuance. You can have a game which is, I mean, truly in boxing, you know, you can win fights with just your jab. It happens almost all the time. It's pretty common because it's all about understanding the subtleties of how that strike or how that movement fits, understanding how position works. Like, that's why I think that's why I look at fighters like this and I think well schooled, because it's like the reason he had that confidence, the reason he was able to be so focused, I think, and to just, you know, do a jab now and then and not really be worried about all this crazy shit Cub is trying, is like, he understands, if I stand angled against my opponent, if I stand against him in this angle at this range, like, what can he hit me with? What am I vulnerable to? And I'm lining up so that my jab is on target pretty much all the time. It's just that Moicano understands that he is like balanced and in the right position to not get hit and to hit back. And that's what every exchange looked like, is Moicano just sort of watching the exchange unfold. And Cub was the one who would, even though he was landing a good number of strikes early, Cub was the one who would be like flinching and overreacting after landing his shots. He would be in there in range, not sure what the hell would be coming back at him, almost panicking in the effort to make sure it didn't land. You didn't see any of that out of Moicano. Pure confidence in his fundamental technique.
So like I said, Cub came in behind a lot of kind of dipping strikes, and you could see Moicano just he would just throw the jab at it the vast majority of the time, and then he just threw a step knee at one point, and Cub went right into it. And this is the thing, is that he knew there were areas that the jab wouldn't cover. There are techniques that were going to come in past it. Yeah. But he wasn't hungry to fill those spaces with anything, unless he knew it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. He was just like, okay, if you're coming in, you're changing your level. Do you do it the first time? Do you do it the second time? Do you do it the third? And he waited until he was convinced, because he knew that his jab would cover him from almost every other thing that Cub was coming in with. And then until he was utterly convinced, and then he just like, okay, I've read this perfectly, step knee. Yeah.
And because he's reading it, but writing it perfectly too. He's not at a range from which he could really be surprised when throwing his jab. You know, he's in a good position. And so it's like, okay, now I see he's trying to get around the jab. He still has to cover the distance of my jab to make that counter work. So it's easy to make the switch up call in those circumstances. it's just all about being a very fundamentally solid fighter, I think. That
he is together with Holloway. The best fighter in that division at repositioning with his jab.
Absolutely,
because Aldo, amazing jab, but he tends to defend and throw, and sort of it tends to be off his move. It tends to be off his counters that he tends, he tends to basically plant his feet and throw it. Whereas Moicano is happy to circle and throw.
Mm-hmm.
He's much more mobile artillery when it comes to actually being able to throw his jab from a number of positions.
He out-pivot jabbed Calvin Kattar, who has an excellent ability to stay lined up and reposition and re-angle behind his jab. And honestly, like, if you want to see how a pivot jab is supposed to work, the knockdown that did proceed to finish in this fight, just watch the way that Moicano closes distance just enough to drive through the target, but also it's all about getting off to the angle and making that pivot part of the motion of the jab, so that you are lining up the jab straight down the center as you throw it. It's just basic shit, fundamental shit that everything except for the wild swinging counters from Moicano are extremely textbook, and tactically that's textbook too, because at the very least it forces people to back the fuck off. So he doesn't do anything thoughtlessly or pointlessly. He's a really well put together fighter. Who do you want to see him fight at featherweight? I'm super excited now to see who Moicano might be able to match up with. People were asking for Moicano versus Mendes, which I wouldn't mind seeing, I don't think, although I don't know if it's the first matchup I asked for.
Yeah, I'm down with that. I think that would be a really close matchup. I think Jose Aldo is the obvious choice. Also, I think Edgar Korean Zombie winner would be someone that he would deserve to fight and would not get, because it depends how long Holloway is out, basically, and if they can figure it out.
I mean, they maybe won't do it. I'm holding on a tiny bit of hope because Brian Ortega is a madman. But Moicano did ask to fight Brian Ortega for an interim title after winning this. And if Max Holloway can't come back, like, would you not? Again, no one else, I guess it's not marketable at all. People probably still have no idea who Moicano is. And they probably don't really know who Ortega is either, to be honest. But would you not see that fight again? I mean, I would absolutely watch a rematch of that.
That fight was incredible, and one of those ones which has only gotten better when you've seen what the two guys have done since. Is that it was just great. Imagine
that fight, but with both of these guys having adjusted to it. It sounds utterly enticing. So Moicano's the real fucking deal, no doubt about that. How about the rest of this card? What else happened?
We had an amazing good bad fight in.
Yes.
in Kevin Holland, Thiago Santos. That was incredible.
The best bad fight I've seen in ages on a UFC card. Really?
That was. Yeah, I'm
a fan.
I'm looking forward to seeing him. Yeah, seeing Kevin Holland fight again.
Absolutely a fan, right? Like, he's just constantly mouthing off during the fight. Yeah. He got taken down in the third round. He was like losing every round, and a lot of it was because he was being out wrestled and beaten up. He got taken down again, and he's right by his corner, and he looks at him and he says, "I got an idea," and then he just doesn't do anything differently. He's like, I've got it. I'm going to solve it this time. And then he like turned away and half guard and gave up his back. I'm like, what is...
Yeah. He was like, just a point, this is like, where he's going, this is crazy.
Yeah.
He's just getting punched in the face. He's like, yes, this is.
Thiago Santos is like such a self-serious person too. He had no idea. Yeah. Like, he was punching.
What to make of this man?
Yeah. He like escaped a submission and punched Kevin Holland in the mouth on the ground. And Kevin Holland just looked him in the eyes and said, "What the fuck?" And Thiago Santos stopped hitting him. He was like,
what? Suddenly made him feel like that this was rude.
Yeah. He was not sure how to respond. So Kevin Holland, instant star.
Just, random, just confusing people with random talk and then weaponized ragdoll physics as his fighting style.
Absolutely. I love it. His style is the Unreal Engine glitching out. Absolutely awesome. But really, bantamweights, Pedro Munoz and Brett Johns are the worthwhile ones to talk about. Takeaways from this one, we'll try to be quick about these if we can. But
much as we thought going into the fight, really, Brett Johns fights at a range which has a style which matches up poorly with Munoz's, much as it in a different way to the way it did against Aljamain Sterling. Sterling could, you were like, Brett Johns wants to fight in the pocket. He wants to phase shift between wrestling and striking. Sterling was a better wrestler and able to snipe him from the outside.
Yeah.
Munoz is just a more powerful, more diverse striker, and in fact, also not a dramatically worse wrestler. I was just thinking that he was going to be able to get him with. I thought if they had grappling exchanges, Munoz would just, submit him from his back, but he is, in fact, he didn't even get taken down.
He's a very good wrestler. I remember back when he first came to the UFC, he was a Black House guy, like off and on a little bit. And I think he worked with Kenny, who's the wrestling coach, who did work with Machida and them, Kenny Johnson? Kenny something. And he, I think he said of Pedro Munoz, like, oh, he's in there with NCAA wrestlers in the gym and they can't take him down. Like, if Munoz doesn't want to go for his guillotine, he is an exceptionally good wrestler, actually. And that clearly gave Johns difficulties. Yeah, it was like a Munoz, the negative parts of Munoz's game just matched up differently with Johns than the negative parts of Sterling's game had. Where, like, it's in both of them, it kind of canceled out his usual switch-ups to takedowns approach. But what the result, what kind of fight that resulted in was vastly different. Where Sterling was like Johns didn't have the craft to effectively chase him down and corral him. And Pedro Munoz, he not being able to take him down just meant he had to brawl with him. And Pedro Munoz tends to win those kinds of fights. Even against like very good strikers like Jimmy Rivera, Pedro Munoz has had cases for winning that kind of fight. And I guess John showed some nice moves, his combination punching. He definitely showed some heart. I kind of want to talk about what fights like this do to young prospects, though, because we don't think about this often enough. Like, this could be like the end of Brett Johns as a hopeful. Fights like this could legitimately mean the end of a prospect's future, because he has that confidence-breaking loss to Aljamain Sterling. Seemed mentally to have bounced back pretty well for this matchup, but then this is what he gets after that. His first ever professional defeat, that's always a big bruise on the confidence, and then come back to get beaten much, much worse and take a lot more damage. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, the thing is that in some ways, the issue is simply that Brett Johns' game is not built to beat the top of the bantamweight division.
No.
There's almost no one you could look at there and say, because he's not a great striker and he's not a great wrestler, and you need to be very, very, very good at these two things in order to beat. I mean, so in terms of it being a kind of prospect breaking loss, it might be. I mean, the thing is, he showed a ridiculous amount of heart.
Oh my
so
God.
It's the question. It's always the question of, did he spend something permanent,
right,
or was this just an insane person just thinking, well, I pretty much almost had that guy. I mean, he was. I think I saw him on Twitter after the fight saying, it was really tough, especially after I won the first round. And it's like, he really did come close to winning any rounds.
Yeah, and that's the trouble too. Like, I don't know. I know a corner would never have stopped a fight like this because how hard Brett Johns was fighting back. He was going for it, man. He had so much guts.
Yeah, and getting out of that guillotine multiple times, like, so it was incredibly impressive.
Yeah,
there's absolutely no no quitting that man.
But also, it literally just took one smart tactical decision from Pedro Munoz to completely shut Brett Johns out in the third round. Like, that's how much damage this fight had cost him. How much he had been through, that in the third round, like, he was taken down and it was it. He just couldn't do anything. Like, his liver was shot, his leg was shot, he took huge shots to the head and was hurt multiple times. Like, we didn't need to see that third round. You know, we didn't learn anything, and clearly, having seen it now, we can say at least Brett Johns was not going to win that fight. So I'm a little concerned about that, because I do think, like, yeah, Brett Johns, he doesn't have a game designed to beat the top of the division now, but he's 26. He's been fighting pro for 6 years. Who's to know if, you know, given his first loss and a little time, he wouldn't have been able to add those layers. Now, I don't know. I'm a little questionable about that. But Pedro Munoz, you know, I'm actually getting better too, like a little better defensively than he has been in previous fights. Granted, Brett Johns not the trickiest striker, but again, as I said, Johns was doing a decent job with his combinations. And Munoz, I was really impressed by how well he countered too. Like, there's still not a ton of nuance to his defense, but he is clearly prepared and waiting and expecting a shot when he does go to his defense. He's not guessing in exchanges. And he did a really nice job of coming back with combinations. Pedro Munoz's left hook is becoming one of his most dangerous weapons, where he just follows up, ends every attack by closing the door with that left hand, and did a really nice job against an admittedly forgiving style matchup. But yeah, Munoz is he's not done developing yet as a fighter, so I enjoy watching that as well. How about finally, before we wrap up, Alex Perez fought Jose Torres. My God. Jose Aldo has ruined me for life. Jose Torres on the Fight Pass prelims here. Densest fighter in the universe. Alex the Neutron Star Perez, as we learned.
Yes. So, for those who haven't seen it, I believe, maybe was it Mark Raimondi? But someone's put up, basically, they've now put up the CSAC's actual weights for the fighters. And Alex Perez was the heaviest fighter on the card for his weight. He was at something like 146 pounds, which is insane. And he didn't look that big, which is weird. So we were having a discussion beforehand, and we have realized that Alex Perez is merely incredibly dense.
Yep, he's just a white dwarf. Who, yep. He did. I mean, I expected him to be like the bigger, stronger flyweight. I think that is still kind of his brand. And certainly when he fought Eric Shelton in his last fight, he looked a lot bigger than Eric Shelton. But he didn't really dwarf Shorty Torres in this matchup the way I expected him to. But he didn't need to. Here's the story on Alex Perez, in case you haven't been following his career up to this point. And you should be. Flyweight is actually kind of fun if you give it a chance. Perez was a wrestler more than anything else up to this point. And a good one, you know, had a very good snatch single, excellent chain wrestler, also a phenomenal submission grappler, has great chokes from just about every position. He has a great squeeze, and if you give him your neck, he has one of those like perfect wrestlers jiu-jitsu games where it's just all about getting to positions that wrestlers like anyway, and then adding chokes onto that. And in this matchup, he came out and boxed Shorty Torres the fuck up. Threw a lot of strikes. I think he threw well over 100 strikes in this first round, and it only lasted 3.5 minutes. And he landed a ton of shots. And I like, for a guy I haven't seen do a lot of committed striking before, I was really impressed with how he approached these striking exchanges. He seemed to have a really good idea for like how the rhythm of an exchange would go. He maintained his position very well, and he threw combinations when he countered every single time, and ended the fight with a savage, like 12-shot combination, just poured it on. What did you make of this performance, man?
This was, again, not something I was expecting.
Right.
The guy who I expected to win won.
Yeah.
And this is similar in its basic dynamic is sort of similar to the bantamweight fight we saw between Ricky Simon and Montel Jackson, in that it was just this is someone who likes to pick their shots and likes to work and be the better athlete and get their time to get the timing against someone who's just a whirlwind.
Right.
And
which was clearly Perez's approach, because Torres is known to be a bit of a slow starter. He's one of those like Donald Cerrone where he actually starts faster than he probably should a lot of the time. And so Perez just wanted to overwhelm him, I guess, before Torres could pick up could start to pick up on the fight.
Yeah, and that was just exceptionally impressive. He just came after him. He clearly had a game plan in mind, came after him and just decided he was going to not let him work his way into the fight at all. And, you know, that's 2 wins over strong prospects, very good athletes that he's just that I don't think I expected him to beat Eric Shelton, but Jose Torres, I did not expect him to just blow him out of the water. Yeah,
he absolutely demolished him. And the thing is, too, like, you don't know, like, stamina will really surprise you at places like flyweight, even when the guy is cutting over 20 pounds to make the limit. But, I mean, I was thinking, like, oh, man, it's a good thing Perez got this finish, because if he hadn't, it looked like a kind of fight where he might have gassed himself. He was working so hard in the first round and then really went for the finish. I was like, man, if Shorty survives this, he's the kind of fighter who could get back into this. But then a minute later, they're already doing the post-fight interview, and Perez has caught his breath already and seems fine. So, like, maybe he can do this kind of stuff to other flyweights, which makes him really exciting, because, like, this is a finisher who is now proven to be a threat everywhere. And is absolutely a finishing threat on the ground still. I saw our dear friend Mookie Alexander ask for this. I want to get your take on it just before we wrap up. Alex Perez versus Alexandre Pantoja. What do you think about that for his next fight?
That sounds great. Sounds
like it would be incredibly exciting to watch. And yeah, I'm pretty hyped. It's not often that I guess we get a lot of potential top level prospects at flyweight, but it's so hard to step forward in this division. You know, like, I thought Eric Shelton could be that guy, but he's had a hard time developing, and you just can't have, like, any wrinkles, any usual prospect wrinkles in this division, because they can set you back years. And Perez is unique in that he seems to be answering challenges in more and more impressive and scary ways as he progresses. So, one of many hot prospects right now in the UFC. And that's pretty much it for this episode of Heavy Hands, UFC 227. It left us feeling vaguely depressed, but we cannot, for the life of us, say that it was not a very good card and a very good night of fights. So we hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did, and hopefully left with fewer existential dilemmas occupying your mind. Phil, before we wrap up, have anything coming out this week?
I do not. I don't have any. So we don't have any previews, and I don't have anything like in the pipeline ready to go at the moment. So sadly, not.
Maybe we should do an article together, Phil. People don't like those, right?
Nope.
We should write something together. Maybe something about I don't know, Kevin Holland. Something that ignites the imagination.
Yep. How he's the greatest new prospect to hit the UFC, at least from an entertainment standpoint.
Oh, he really is, by the way. He really is the perfect middleweight. Yeah, well,
you realize he's also the kind of guy who's like,
yeah,
we're going to be like, my God, he can withstand getting hit by Thiago Santos, and then he's just going to get knocked the fuck out by some pillow-fisted wrestler.
He's going to fight Gerald Meerschaert next and get just obliterated just with a left hand.
Absolutely flatlined. Yep. Yeah.
It's going to be awesome. Oh, I can't wait for the career of Kevin Holland, however short, or he could also fight for like 10 years. I have no idea. It's middleweight. So this is why we tune in. But yeah, that's pretty much Heavy Hands. Thank you guys for listening. And, we love you. We appreciate you. If we could, we would hold every one of your hands while we record these episodes. But unfortunately, the closest we can come to that is giving you bonus content on our Patreon. And you should, though, check out the Heavy Hands Patreon if you have not already. We had a bonus episode last week. Who fucking knows? There could be a bonus episode this week as well, because Phil, you and I apparently cannot talk for less than an hour and 40 minutes anytime we get together. So there has been bonus content just pouring out of our eyes for the last couple of weeks. And, we do, there's a Slack on there for people who listen to the show to talk with each other and other stuff as well. So check out the Heavy Hands Patreon and find us both on social media as well. Phil's been getting great marks on there. I mean, really, Phil, you're a very funny guy. That's the thing most people notice. They don't seem to like your analysis. On the show, no one's mentioned it or said anything about it, but every time a new episode comes out, they say, Phil's funny. So...
Excellent. It's good to have something. I can be the funny clown.
I don't have either, right? They don't like my analysis or my jokes. But you should find Phil on Twitter. He's definitely a good follow, and his handle is @EvilGregJackson. And of course, mine is @BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. Find us on there with your comments, your questions, your concerns, and your workshopped jokes, because clearly at least one of us needs help. And until next time, thank you all again so much for listening to Heavy Hands. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, realizing he already ruined it by saying the title of the show, he continued, this has been Heavy Hands. What a graceful ending.